Good morning. Welcome to the West Ham Voice on a Wednesday morning, the day before our final game in the group stages of the Europa League. Now, West Ham United, as we know, have been blowing hot and cold throughout this season. We've had moments where we've been excellent and we've had moments where we've been pretty poor. Now, many fans will say that we've had more poor moments than we have had good moments. And the final game in the group stage of the Europa League is a game that I think we need to demonstrate how good a team we can be, especially when we feel or we look to be under pressure, under the cosh, a lot of criticism thrown our way about boring football, etc., etc. The game against Freiburg on Thursday night is a great opportunity to sort of give us a little bit of what should we say? Something to cheer about, I guess. It's a game under the lights. We tend to generally do better when we are playing evening football, as was demonstrated in the second half against Spurs last Thursday. We can do it when we play on Sundays. Mid-afternoon, 2:00 kickoffs, etc. There tends to be a lack of atmosphere at the game. And I think David Moyes alluded to it. I know a lot of fans interpreted that as David Moyes was having a go at the fans. I don't think he was. I think he was suggesting that playing on Sunday lunchtimes don't have the same kind of feel as playing under the lights on a Thursday night or whatever night. Of course, Thursday nights, because that's when most of our evening games are being played, Europe, etc. So Freiburg could be a defining game for us, not only because we have to get a result. Look, we've already qualified. That's not a problem. We can rest on our laurels, be happy with first place if we get that, be happy with second place. But of course, second place has got its, pop problems attached to it. Do we want to call them problems? I don't know. When you look at the teams that have dropped down from the Champions League, who West Ham United could potentially face in the knockout stage, if we finish second in the knockout stages in February, then initially you'd look at these teams and you go, well, not too bad, nothing to be that concerned about. You know, there are teams there like Benfica and Braga from Portugal, Feyenoord from the Netherlands, Galatasaray from Turkey, Lens from France, and Young Boys from Switzerland. And I look at those teams and I say to myself, to be honest with you, if we got any of those teams in the knockout stages, if we do finish second, I wouldn't be too concerned. But then, of course, there are other games happening on Wednesday night, and these teams could potentially drop down to the Europa League as well. And they include AC Milan, Paris Saint-Germain, Newcastle United, Shakhtar Donetsk, and Porto, again from Portugal. Now, again, I don't know what happens in the group stages, whether we end up playing a team from the same league as ours or whether we're exempt from playing Newcastle. I'm not sure. But I wouldn't fancy wanting to play them in over two legs to stay in the Europa League. And then when it comes to AC Milan and Paris Saint-Germain, yeah, fantastic ties if they happen. But again, you'd be a little bit concerned having to come up against either of them. And then Porto and Shakhtar, decent teams. That's why they're in the Champions League. But again, potentially, I would fancy my chances more over those two than I would over the others. So there's a reason. Not only we need to put in a decent performance to sort of bring the life back into West Ham United at this stage in the season, we also need to really not have to have another two games to play in February. So it's quite crucial. It's crucial to get the fan base going again. It's crucial to sort of get the momentum going again. And it's also crucial to avoid, with our big, fixture pile-ups that we have in the Premier League, it's crucial to avoid having to play another two games as well. So it's quite a big deal Thursday night. I think under the lights, I think it's going to drive us on. I think we are going to put in a performance. Fingers crossed. But of course, it also depends on what happens with David Moyes and his team selection. Now, let's talk about Freiburg for a moment. As we know, We're top of the group stage at this moment in time, and that's purely down to the head-to-head against Freiburg. And that's the only game that Freiburg have lost in the group stages, which was against West Ham back in October. And you know what? We actually played really well that day. We played pretty decently. We and you think about the way we started when Lucas Paqueta scored that stunning header in what was that, the opening 8 minutes or something like that, and we were quite comfortable going through that game until the second half. And in the second half, Freiburg changed it up and they really came at us. They really sort of fancied their chances, and the changes that they made put them on the front foot. And they got an early goal in the second half to make it 1-1. But we persevered and we got a goal through Agurd. He scored the winner on something like the 66th minute. So it was a good result to get, especially with no away fans there as well. It was an excellent result to get. You look at the form of both teams over the last half a dozen games, and it looks pretty even. Yeah, West Ham United have won 4, drawn 1 and lost 1. And Freiburg have won 4, drawn 1 and lost 1. But you look at the order of those wins, those draws and those defeats. For West Ham United, as we know, we've been doing, we came back and beat Nottingham Forest, we beat Burnley, and then we struggled against Bakatopola, and then we struggled against Crystal Palace where we drew 1-1. And then we put in, like I said, that fantastic second half performance against Spurs last Thursday. And then we went to a disastrous defeat against Fulham away from home at the weekend. So that order of merit makes it look like we're kind of a bit shaky. And many fans will suggest that, we had lucky wins against the likes of Burnley, against Nottingham Forest, and against Spurs. Well, I think we had a good 15 minutes, half an hour against Burnley. I think we had a good 10 last minutes against Nottingham Forest. And I think we had an excellent second half against Spurs. So we know West Ham United can turn it on when we need to. And we did that in those games. But it would be nice to actually see, rather than just half an hour or 20 minutes, etc., it would be nice to see us do that throughout a whole game, wouldn't it? And then you look at Freiburg. So they smashed Bakatopola 5-0. And then they went on to a defeat against Red Bull Leipzig. And it's been suggested that they were actually unlucky. Despite the scoreline, they were unlucky in that game to come away with such a heavy defeat. And then they had a draw. And then they had another 5-0 win in the group stage of the Europa League against Olympiacos. And then 2 1-0 wins subsequently. And it's those 2 games in the Europa League against Bakatopola and Olympiacos where they went and thrashed those 2 teams pretty convincingly. And all we got from those 2 games were 2 scrappy 1-0 wins. That's the best we can say. They were scrappy 1-0 wins. So going into this game, many would suggest that Freiburg are actually the team in form at this moment in time. They've got players. Their top goal scorer, Vincenzo Grifo, is the top goal scorer for the club throughout. He's also their top goal scorer in the Europa League as well. But they've also got other players like Maximilian Eggestein, who is in the top 8 of Europa League's assists. He's got 3 assists so far. So they've got some very special players. Doan, who I mentioned before, who was their Japanese international who came on in the second half of our game, in our first game against them. And he was the catalyst for making those change, taking Freiburg putting Freiburg on the front foot. So they've got players, not only decent players, but they've got players who are currently in form. And that's what we need from West Ham. Look, I look at the game against Fulham at the weekend, and I've got to put it down to we never suffer such a heavy defeat. It's just not like West Ham United. And it's got to be down to, and I know people have made excuses about, being fatigued. Moyes have been talking about fatigue, about the fixture list, not happy having to play really late on Thursday night and then having to play on Sunday, etc. in the afternoon and all that sort of stuff. But I believe that there is a bug going around. I'm going to talk about our players in a minute who may or may not be available. And I think that bug did take its toll. But then that's why we have a squad, so that when you've got players who are out of form, who are ill, who are ill or who are injured, that's where you put the players in. And interestingly, even some of the players that we used at the weekend, like Fornals, apparently was also had that bug. So you got to ask yourself, then why not use different players rather than players who had the bug? So when it comes to our team, one of the main concerns is Edson Alvarez. He turned up at Craven Cottage at the weekend and had to be sent home. So he was likely to be starting in the game against Fulham at the weekend, but he just wasn't well enough. And it's been suggested that Alvarez could potentially miss another 2 games, being the game against Freiburg and the game at the weekend against Wolves. Now, we know that West Ham United, the squad was sent home over the last 2 games, over the last 2 days in order to sort of recover, get themselves a bit better, a bit fitter, away from the virus, etc. And all we've got to hope for is that has worked. But the news that came out on Tuesday, late Tuesday afternoon, was that Alvarez could be missing for the game against Freiburg. And that creates a huge concern, because what does then David Moyes do? And you've got to think, if Alvarez is missing, then what's Moyes going to do in terms of the midfield? This is what I think the lineup may be. Fabianski in goal. We believe that Areola still has a wrist injury, but I don't think that would matter, because I think Fabianski would have started in goal in this competition anyway. I think Moyes is going to. There might be a temptation for David Moyes to play Zuma, but I think with the game coming up against Wolves at the weekend, I think he's going to be rested for that. And I'm even wondering whether Ogbonna might play in this game as well. But I think what Moyes will do, he'll go with Soufal, he'll go with Emerson as the fullbacks, and then he'll stick with Mavropanos and Agurd in the middle of defence. And then how do you compensate for Edson Alvarez? He's become such a vital player for us that we know what Moyes is likely to do. He's likely to put Ward-Prowse alongside Souček in order to cover. That isn't the best defensive midfield cover that we've got. But I think that's what he'll do. And then if he wants to be uber safe, he's going to go with Fornals out on the left, because he's a kind of a safer bet, with Kudus on the right and then Paquetá supporting Bowen up front. Now, what he might also do, and there's suggestion that the only other difference he might make is on the left side, where he might decide to maybe put Freiburg under the cosh a little bit and use Ben Rama as a more attack-minded left-sided midfielder than Fornals, who kind of these days, probably unwantingly, kind of these days plays more as a defensive-minded left-sided midfielder. So he may go for that as well. So rather than, because the one thing that we know we can't do is if David Moyes tries to go out and defend a draw, we're going to lose. You know, we've been exceptionally poor at keeping clean sheets this season. I think we've kept maybe 1 or 2 in the Europa League and maybe 1 in the Premier League all season. So Moyes, if he goes out there and tries to play for a draw, I think we might get beat. And then if he really wants to go left field, and I don't see why it should be left field, but if he really wants to do something different and use the squad that we have, then why not give Maxwel Cornet an opportunity to play in this game? When he came on against Bakatopola a few weeks ago, he actually made a difference. He came on for the last 20 minutes and he actually physically made a difference in the game. And of course, he provided the assist for the goal. Now, there are other players that you might suggest, you know, could be used. If I go back to the squad and you look down on the left side where it says subs, there are players like Ben Johnson. Would he make a difference? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think Moyes would risk weakening the defense in that way. And then people are talking about Connor Coventry. You know, why doesn't he play? Clearly, David Moyes doesn't fancy him, but Coventry must be the backup to Alvarez because he's the only other defensive midfielder that we have in the squad. And then, of course, you've got Mubama and you've got Ings. But I think Mubama and Ings will probably come on as late subs if needed. So for me, the standout is Maxwel Cornet in that squad. He seems to be the only one that isn't being really given a chance. I mean, I was baffled at the weekend against Fulham. Why? I mean, David Moyes made 5 substitutions and he still didn't seem to get a sniff. There is, of course, another player, is Tilo Kehrer, who's also not getting a sniff. But for me, if you want to be different, if you want to be attack-minded, then surely Cornet must be given an opportunity to shine. Look, what's going to be the result? It's a hard one to call because Freiburg are the informed team, and even though they've got 1 or 2 injuries of their own, they seem to have decent enough cover to sort of get through that. I'm going to say we're going to avoid a knockout, a 2-legged knockout stage in February, which means we're either going to win or we're going to draw. I think it's actually going to be an exciting game. I think, in a way, because Freiburg have got nothing to lose, they might, given that they might go for it, it might help us in our counter-attack. And that's the way we might win this game, because Freiburg will go for it. They need to win, whereas all we need to do is draw or get a win, whereas Freiburg need to go for a win. And given that, they'll try and go for it, which will expose them at the back. And if we can make the most of that exposure, I think we'll get the result we need. But what we do need is players with a little bit of pace to make the most of that exposure, so when they do go forward trying to get the goal and they leave gaps in the back, that's when we need pace in order to exploit those gaps. And for me, one of the players that can possibly do that is Maxwel Cornet. Do join me for a post-match review after the game. Of course, if we score any goals, as you know, I'll always put up a quick snapshot video as well of the fans and so on. So come on, you Irons. Let's make this. Let's do something different here. Let's use this as a catalyst to actually move forward and get some enjoyment back in our football. And this could be, I don't care if we don't have 50% possession or 60% possession, but let's make the most of the possession that we have. And if counter-attacking, even at home, means getting through without having to go through the knockout stages, then so be it.